Tonight is going to be the first of... if I keep looking up here, by the way, it's where my monitor is. I've got the monitor placed above my webcam, so I'm looking in that general direction. But if I forget to look at the camera, that's why. It won't matter in a minute when we actually go to the kit. But this is the first of the live stream builds, or the first session of the live stream build. I say builds because there will be multiple ones of these. So, a few little updates while I'm just finishing this tidying. It's getting too hot now. This with my heater on. A few little updates, of course. 2 weeks now at the shop, 2 full weeks. I can confidently say, as a baseline, I won't break even with the current business. So I definitely do need the Google adverts and the what is it? The online store to be able to make anything from the shop. So, but that's kind of what I expected. Did pretty well in the first week. Second week's been a little bit slow, but yeah, I didn't expect to be retiring and hanging up my pension on a couple of weeks of trading. I know it's going to take a lot more work than that. I just kind of wanted to know where I was at, because otherwise you do adverts, you do other stuff, and you don't know whether they've been effective or whether it was just word of mouth or whatever. So I wanted a baseline before I started pushing on that side, but I know it will take some pushing. Okay, we have a clean bench. Well, no, we have a clear bench. It's not necessarily a clean bench, which is why. So one of the secrets of my, not really a secret, one of the things I always do is I have this roll. It costs, this actually came from the Works in the UK, which I guess is a bit like a small version of Hobby Lobby or Hobby Barn or something in the US. It's just a roll of it's coloring paper. It's basically this roll that you buy so that your kids can scroll over it, and then you can just pull out more if they want a bigger piece, and so on and so forth. And I just use it to cover my desk with. This is a really easy and cheap way of firstly keeping your area clean. So if you have a big spill, it goes on the paper, you wipe it up. Once you're done, you just throw that away. Well, put it in the recycling. And it gives a nice white background, which is also handy if you're dropping anything. Just really, there might be a bit of a noise there while I move my microphone. And then I think we'll have a nice new blade. The old scalpel, if I can find them. I have my trusty companion Pablo here with me. Just there we go. There's Pablo. Not really sure about what's going on, but my girlfriend Maria, as some of you will know, is from Barcelona in the north of Spain, and she goes back about 3 times a year. Let's get this website sorted. About 3 times a year, just to see. She got a flat still there with her sister, and she goes back to kind of recharge on that continental energy and get away from the depressing weather that has turned in the UK now, because it is pretty miserable. We've had a really nice couple of weeks, unseasonably warm, and now we're back to September with a bit of a shock. So let me show you what I'm doing on the bench. There we go. A literal blank sheet, and of course the model kit in question. So fortunately, with the angle of this, I can't get the whole thing on, but it is, of course, Airfix's brand new for a couple of months, Hawker Hunter. I say brand new, it is actually their old Hawker Hunter with various parts retooled, because they recognized that there were some shape errors I think, in some of the front nose area. And Airfix being what Airfix are at the moment, they actually went back and corrected it, which I think is laudable, and we don't often see that from a company. They've gone back and created what they believe is the most accurate Hawker Hunter out there now. I'm not an expert on the Hawker Hunter, but it looks like a Hunter to me. So there's all our sprues. We won't be needing the clear one for a while, so I'm going to put that in the box. We'll come back to those. And we won't be needing these for a while either. So this build is just going to be out of the box. So I'm going to be doing 2 Hunters. This one and the Academy 148th, which I've got in my stash, which also has, I think, an Aries resin set, I think it is. I'm going to be doing a lot of extras to that. So not just the Aries set, which is a cockpit detail set. It'll also be, things like putting brake lines on the undercarriage, all that kind of stuff, all that good stuff. To see the difference between a modern kit, I mean, the Academy kit is probably 20 odd years old now, but it's, as I was saying to Moss this week, really anything past 1990 in terms of the molding technology, because that's kind of when slide molding technology came in, or started being used by the modeling industry at least. The technology hasn't really changed. There is a new casting technology called CeoCast, which is proprietary at the moment, being used for miniatures, which kind of combines, it's an injection molding technique, but it's much more accessible. It costs much less to make the molds, and it uses a specialized plastic, which is proprietary at the moment, so there's no third party. But effectively, you can actually send 3D printed parts to the company. They will create a frame and cast it for you. And then you can buy the machine and do it if you're a company. Mainly for miniatures at the moment, but I think as that technology evolves, it will start to spill out to things like, maybe not entire kits, but certainly to detail pieces, replacing resin, because resin is quite a difficult thing to use. Resin dust is not good for you. So we'll see. But as I went back, that was a huge segue. In terms of casting technology, injection molding has remained in principle the same from when it was used back in the 50s. Yes, we've got better refinement now, we've got better materials, we've got better things to be able to, like CNC machining now, to be able to create the very fine things. Spark welding as well to create these very fine panel lines. Got all of that, but in terms of a modern kit, anything from the 90s has that capability. Revell in the 90s were making some very nice kits. I don't know what's happened to Revell. I'll be doing a video on that sometime in the near future. But yeah, the Academy kit, I think, is equivalent to this in terms of the general overall layer of overall levels of detail. An Academy and Airfix, I think, let's say recent Academy and recent Airfix, I think, are roughly equivalent in most things. Price, of course, of Academy kits tends to be a little bit higher because they have to be imported. And that is, of course, in the UK I'm speaking about. Anyway, enough waffle. Let's get on with the build. I'm going to put there we go. That's my branding for tonight, because I haven't worked out the digital stuff yet, so I spent all the time trying to get the camera working. So, of course, as all aircraft kits tend to, not all of them, but the great majority of aircraft kits start with the cockpit. Now, do we actually want to see that in frame? Maybe. I've actually got a couple of sets of nippers I'm using. I got these AK ones recently. I got them from the Salisbury Model Show. They were actually in a review of toolkits I did, and they are single-bladed nippers. Now, to start with, I thought, wow, they're single-bladed nippers in a toolkit, which isn't very expensive. And then I thought, oh no, they're not single-bladed, they're just really, really fine. Then having gone back and looked at them again, they are single-bladed. They're actually really good, but I actually know the company that makes them. So, and also make Display and other kind of makes. So you see these are unbranded. So single-bladed nippers, really, really nice action. One of the things I'm considering for the shop is actually getting these branded for me, so with Man's Model Moments. And the main thing that's stopping me at the moment is because there's a minimum order quantity of 500 units, so that's a lot. So I really need the website and regular orders to be coming in, but I'll be charging a lot less than Display and God Hand. They do various grades of these, obviously, including up to the kind of God Hand level, but I won't be charging those sorts of prices. But that's one thing I'm considering anyway. Now, I need my nerd glasses, wherever they are, because I won't be able to find, because I've tidied everything up. Otherwise, I won't be able to see anything. Ah, there they are. I couldn't see them because I don't have them on. So, stage one, step one, we have the cockpit, and of course, step two, we have a choice of whether to use the part which doesn't have the seatbelts on, or the part that does have the seatbelts on. Whether you want a pilot sitting in it or not. Of course, they don't supply a pilot. And because I'm going to be doing the all-out build with the Academy one, with resin and stuff, which obviously isn't also going to have that in, so I will be doing the second option with said seatbelt. So right in the middle of the sprue is where we have these seat pots. Of course, my dog wants to go outside now. Go on then. Go on then. He'll be in a minute. This is step one. Step two, we have C66. So you can see them there quite nicely. The seat without seatbelts. You can put a pilot in there who already has seatbelts on them, obviously, and then the seat with the seatbelts. This actually looks pretty good in terms of the seat harness. There's some, an injection molded part. That is not bad detail. C1. Again, I'll show you this when I've snipped it off. This actually, the top of the ejection seat actually has the pull handles. See that? That's pretty nice. So that's steps 1 to 3. Perhaps if I do it like that. For these sorts of parts, I generally just use a scalpel or modelling knife to trim the parts, because at this stage, things like this seam are never going to be seen, so they're going to be hidden by the sides of the cockpit. So I don't see really that much point in going overboard with sanding. So I am of the school of modelers that believes if it can't be seen, it doesn't actually matter. Or at least I'm not going to put in the same effort as I am something that is visible. Apologies for my dog. He thinks he's a Doberman, but as you've seen, he's a rather small, rather unintimidating looking creature. And the reason we don't dress him up because we enjoy dressing him up. He's actually a Chinese crested. Chinese crested are actually African, they're not Chinese at all, which means they can take as much heat as you can give them, but they can't take the cold at all. Because, as the name suggests, they don't have any fur. Or at least half of them don't. It's a genetic condition. Half of them are what they call powder puff, which, as you can imagine, look rather ridiculous because they are like little puffs of fur. And then half of them only have crests. And it's a genetic condition. If you get two Chinese crested, it doesn't matter what they are, and breed them, you get a 50-50 mix of pups. Come out hairless and powder puff. And we've got one of the hairless ones. He was a rescue. He wasn't socialized. So just test fitting all of this together. That looks pretty good, actually. There's a bit of a seam here at the front. But for injection molded injection seat, that's not bad. Especially in the Hunter where you can't see an awful lot. It has to be said in the cockpit. So I know Tamiya Thin is meant to be applied once you've got the parts together, but I often find pre-applying a little bit just gets the plastic reacting enough to kind of give you that, just that little tack, not really a bond, just almost like a tack. It's then possible to go and put the rest on to give you the actual bond on the plastic. Just close the door. My dog barks at imaginary things in the dark. If you guys have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I can see the chat, unlike the other night when I had to keep switching between. So that isn't a bad joint, but there is a visible seam there. Now again, if you think about the Hunter cockpit and where this is going to go, are you actually going to see that when it's in situ? Probably not. So this is quite cleverly engineered, as a lot of recent Airfix toolings are, so that a lot of the seams, a lot of the what might be problem areas in terms of casting are hidden. Oh, now this is why it's good to have this paper, because it also helps you clear up stuff like when you spill your bottle of Tamiya extra thin. Well, I needed to fill it up again anyway, because of course this isn't actually Tamiya extra thin. Well, it's exactly the same chemical composition. I just didn't pay Tamiya money for it. So that isn't the disaster that you might think it is. Other than the fact that it now absolutely stinks of acetone.
and butyl acetate here now. Ooh. But that is not a bad rendition of the Hunter's ejection seat. Certainly for 4 parts in a pretty simple... Come on then, Pablo, in you come. In a pretty simple assembly. Let's not put it on the big area. It still contains glue, that would be a bit disastrous. For those of you as well that are thinking of any time of visiting a physical shop in the UK, and you're getting low on Tamiya thin, I do offer a refill service for Tamiya Extra Thin at a much reduced cost. Right. Okay, so we then go into the back of the cockpit with part 31, C31. And to that, we're adding C63. Oh, the other thing I tend to do while I'm going through a build like this is if I have alternative parts, I'll actually clip them off. And I'll put those straight into my, well, I usually put them actually in a little sub-pile in my spares box. That way I don't lose track of them. And I don't think, oh, I've still got that part, when actually it's just a spare. Right, C63 is eluding me. 66, 65, 63, there we go. Actually, much smaller than I expected it to be from looking at the instructions. The other thing I find, and one of the reasons I use this paper putting down, is it's much easier to find parts sometimes. So when that fits off onto the instruction sheet, because this is sort of grey on black and white with little red calling out, it's quite easy just to lose parts like that in the sort of melange. They become quite camouflaged. Okay, and the main cockpit tub. C54 and C37. Oh wow, C37 is small. Well, not small, but thin. Delicate. See that? That is not a large part. I'm trying to avoid that. That diffusing and now evaporating area of solvent. Yeah, that is not big. It's rather finely cast. C54, the control column, is a little bit more prominent. But again, still very finely cast. It's got a tiny little nub there. But yeah, you can see that is pretty fine. So going back to stage 4. Okay, so definitely take off those lugs. Now I know a lot of people will look at what I'm doing here and think, oh, Alex, why on earth are you cutting towards your fingers? There's a couple of things. So one is using a scalpel, using any hobby knife. You cut away from yourself, you actually, I find, have less control. At least I do personally. So I prefer to cut, and I'm only using very small motions. And the other thing is, I always try and position it so my thumb nail is higher than my thumb flesh. So if I do slip, all I'm going to do is hit my nail. So I still don't recommend you cut towards yourself, but that is why I personally do. So it is, of course, much riskier than cutting away from you most of the time, although here's how not to cut away from you. You don't do this sort of thing and, you know, cut big strokes like that, because there you're likely to end up slashing yourself, which, especially with something like a scalpel, is not going to be pretty. So I'm sure all of you at some time have stabbed yourself or cut yourself with a hobby knife or craft knife or scalpel. It's not pleasant. It's not the end of the world, but it's best avoided if possible. Okay. So that doesn't look right. That's because I put it in upside down. That looks much better. Thus demonstrating the importance of test fitting. That fits quite nicely. Hopefully this time I can cement it in without spilling solvent everywhere. Indeed I can. So this is obviously the rear bulkhead of the cockpit, together with the ejection seat rails. You can see here we've just got a piece that we're fitting over and then it's creating that. One thing here is there's no real positive location. I would have expected there to be some little ridges on here so that you're cementing that at the correct angle, because there is a little bit of leeway. I mean, if you're careful, you're not going to do it, but yeah, that's something. Okay. Now that I've spilt a lot of my solvent, I'm going to go over to using an actual brush. I actually do find these Humbrol brushes are actually pretty good for Tamiya cement. It allows you to get a bit more on your brush, a little bit more control, I find, than that lid-based one. I know some people love it. I know you can extend the bristles, but I still think these Humbrol brushes are pretty good for glue application. Some of them even work for paint. All right. Just again, a couple of tiny little burrs from where the single-bladed nippers didn't quite match up. So you see, when I'm using these, I do tend to cut right up close to the plastic. I know some people prefer to sort of cut and leave a bit of a nub. It really depends on what sort of part it is and whether I do that or not. So if it's a fairly substantial but not really chunky part, I'll cut close up to it, because generally the single-bladed nippers don't deform the plastic, so you're going to get a nice cut edge, and you've got much less to clean up. Sometimes on more delicate parts, I will actually leave a little bit and then go back in and trim with my scalpel. But it really depends. Like with a lot of these things in modeling, there is no definitive answer. There is what works for you. I'll just find that works for me. So you can see there's a nice positive location piece here on the back. But again, I just don't know why they didn't put a couple of little pieces here just to guide you there. I expected that, but it all works. It goes in, it looks nice. So I think we're free of solvent now. And then ejector seat. Goes on those rails. Now, does it fit just before that? Yes, it does. Okay. That's, I would say, not bad. You've got some decent detail on the side here of the cockpit. And again, the instrument panel is going to be here. There wasn't a lot of room in the Hunter, as there wasn't in a lot of Cold War jets. I mean, it's a little bit different now. I mean, the F-35's got quite a roomy, spacious cockpit. By comparison, of course. Okay, so the one thing I'm noticing here is there is a little bit of a gap here at the back. I don't know if that's going to be addressed at any point. You'll also notice I'm not painting any of this yet. I'm not going to glue the ejection seat in place now, primarily because that does need some detail painting on those. But in terms of this, the Hunter cockpit was all black. I get spelt out here. As was the ejection seat. It's only the cushion and the various straps which are different. But otherwise, you know, it's 85 and 33, which are both black. 85, 85. It's all black, including the instrument panel. We've also got decal. Let's have a look at that. Decal for the instrument panel. Where's that then? Top left-hand corner. Looks quite nice. I never used to be a great fan of decals for instrument panels, but now that Cartograph, and not just Cartograph, other companies do produce excellent decals for instrument panels. Just before, quite often, you would just get like a bunch of white dots. Now, I mean, I bet if you magnified that up, I mean, I can see there are individual markers all the way around that. There is like some dially thing. It's an artificial horizon. You know, they're just really, really good. Far better than I could paint. So I've gone from never using decals on instrument panels to now almost always using decals on instrument panels. But in terms of painting, it's all going to be black. The instrument panel is black. This is black. This is black. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in situ before doing any painting. Now again, there's no right or wrong with when you paint things in a cockpit. There's what works for you and what you want to achieve. Where are my tweezers? I tend to use bent nose tweezers rather than straight ones. They just personally find them easier to get the angle I want to be able to position things like that. There just went straight where I wanted it. Even if it didn't stay at the angle I wanted it. There we go. That's in place there. Nice and easy. And this faces the pilot. There's a little piece there. There we go. Let's check we're still okay with the ejection seat. That looks pretty good. We've got everything in what looks like the right position. So C25 and C7 are where we get into the instrument panel itself. Now, one of the things I like about the AK snippers here is if you look at the the width of these two. See, the AK ones go to a much thinner angle. These are almost like a, not 45, but maybe 30-degree angle. And these are a little bit less. So you get a little bit more taper, which just allows you to get them into slightly smaller areas. You see, so here, that's pretty easy for me to get in. Let's see if I can get these in. Oh, well, I can actually get these in as well, but thus making my point moot. But believe me, some areas are much easier to get in with these than they are with the others. But as always, if you're trying to demonstrate something live and you say something, fate is always going to make you look like an arse. Other good news, I had my first web order on the website for the shop last night. That's all been packaged up, will be collected by Royal Mail. So if you do get a chance and you're in the UK, head on over to mansmodelmoments.com. You'll see my Shopify site. I've only got about 25% of my stock on there at the moment because actually listing the stock on your website first time is a real pain. Once you've got it on there and you run out of stock and you want to restock, it's absolutely really easy. But there's a lot of work involved in putting it all on to start with, and there is only me doing it, so it'll take a while. C7, but I have got a lot of Airfix, 172nd, 148th, and 135th. I've got Tamiya, Italieri, 135th, Armour, 172nd, and 148th scale aircraft, Hobby Boss Armour, Trumpeter Armour, Trumpeter and Hobby Boss aircraft, ICM kits as well at the moment, as well as a second-hand section, which is a bit of a smorgasbord of all kinds of things. Again, that will slowly get built up because the second-hand stuff, I want to check it before I put it on the website and into the shop. I don't want to be selling stuff which is missing bits or doesn't have instructions or decals, at least without warning people. You know, I'm prepared to sell something without instructions, saying it doesn't have instructions because they're scale mates, and you know you can download those things. But I want people to be aware rather than feeling that I've tried to scam them, because that certainly isn't the case. C7 was the part I was looking for. C7. Here we go. The only thing about the AK ones that makes them feel, I don't know, slightly cheaper the action of them isn't as smooth as these. These are very smooth. So these are more like your display. And then I do have another pair. This pair? I'm not sure if it's this pair or the one I've got in the shop, which are like God hand. They're absolutely beautiful. It's like cutting with a lightsaber or something. Here I'm going against all of what I said before. I'm cutting directly towards my flash, but I'm not really... I am cutting, but I'm just doing such fine layers. It's more like a... It's not scraping, because that uses the side of the blade, but I'm just literally almost planing off the top of the plastic here, just to get a smooth area. There we go. Okay. Okay. I'm going to say, so the fitment of that felt really weird until you actually see there is a cutout for it on the rear, because that width there is much wider than the gun sight piece itself. But it has a little piece, which that's the kind of thing I would have expected on this bulkhead before. It wasn't there. Now, if I start to say increasingly weird things through the night, it's probably because of all that Tamiya stuff that I spilt, right? So if I start seeing pink elephants and the like, that's the reason. Okay. I'm just a little intrigued about part C. I want to see how the transparent gun sight piece comes onto it later, because that looks a bit weird. No, but it is correct. That is how it's depicted. No, is there no gun sight transparency piece? Doesn't look like it. Okay. That is a point actually to make now. Look, I do like the way that Airfix supply you options with transparencies like this. I know some of the manufacturers do it as well, but Airfix seem to be consistent in doing this now, giving you, like with the Sea King, parts that can be used with photo etched windscreen wipers, as well as supplying them with windscreen wipers. I think that's pretty good. Okay, just having a quick look back through the chat to make sure I'm not missing anything. But I think we're good. So, looking at the instrument panel as well, you do have some basic detail on that if you wanted to paint it rather than put the decals on. But again, I think painting that, giving a bit of a dry brush just to bring out the raised pieces, and then putting the instrument decal on top of that is going to give you a much better result than just painting alone, unless you are very good at painting. Certainly better than I am at painting anyway. But in terms of it all coming together and looking like a decent cockpit, it's not bad. But again, you've got a very small area here. Okay. So moving on, step 10, C60. Another point about Airfix kits recent Airfix kits that I like, the design philosophy of their sprues is So far, everything I've done on this first page has all come off one sprue. I haven't had to go between sprues. I'd love to see more manufacturers do that more consistently, because again, I know some do. And this is why I think Airfix are definitely heading in the right direction. Despite schoolboy errors with black book releases, you know, that is a tiny transgression, a tiny mistake, compared to things which seem small, like designing your kit so that all of the pieces in the first, set of construction pieces are on the same sprue. That seems logical and like something that a modeler would want, and it is, obviously. But for a manufacturer, that puts big constraints on. Imagine if you had to pack a suitcase, but you had to pack it in a way that, you've got 5 compartments or 6 compartments in your suitcase, and each of them equal. And in each of them, you have to pack what you're going to wear for that one particular day. So day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. That's pretty constrictive, right? Especially if on one day you might be going to the beach and, then maybe out for dinner in the evening and you're coming back. You've got a lot of stuff to put in one bit. It'd be far easier if you can just distribute it evenly over it. But of course, when you actually come to the days, then it's harder to find all those pieces. And that's the kind of simile to think of when they're designing these sprues. Because back in the day, they just used to shove stuff where it would go, right? And some manufacturers still do that. So I think it's one of those things that's quite small and isn't recognized very much. But it's actually, quite a impactful piece. Now, which way does this go? Okay, this way round. And the engineering on that is absolutely perfect. That's just fitted in there. There's not even wiggle room. So I do sound a bit like Moss here in my praise of Airfix, but I really do think that the improvements and changes they've made and the way that they're designing and executing kits really comes through when you actually start to build them and notice. In a lot of cases, I think people won't notice them because they are all, what's the word? Sort of like hygiene things. They're things that you kind of take for granted, but really aren't a given. And I'd encourage anybody who has a beef with Airfix at the moment in terms of what they're making, go back and make an old Frog kit or a Novo kit from the 60s, or even an old Airfix kit from the 60s. And you'll quickly realize how lucky we are today. Now, of course, that doesn't change the fact that I think they really need to kick their Indian production up the arse, or lose them completely and relocate production somewhere else, because I think that is really letting the side down. Okay, so you'll start to see now some of the way that I build kits, which is kind of out of step with how manufacturers do it, because I'll build these little sub-assemblies. Now, I know all of this is going to be sprayed the same color, so I can spray all of this at the same time. But you can't really see what I'm doing there. So I can spray all of this at the same time, obviously. And then I will detail paint the ejection seat. I'll do some dry brushing work on the sides here. Not a lot, to be honest, because of the visibility. And again, same here. I'll just do a dry brushing on here just to bring out the detail of the dials, and then I'll put that decal on. And then I'll bring all these together. So knowing that, I'll put all of those to one side. Put them over here, actually. And then I'll go ahead and look to other pieces of the construction where I can get, because again, I know I've got to paint the inside of this black as well, right? So I don't want to be breaking out the airbrush and putting black in it and then breaking it down and then doing some construction and going back. So I'll try and minimize the amount of changes that I'm going to be doing for my airbrush. Right? One, because I'm lazy, and two, it just helps with keeping your airbrush clean. If you're only putting color in it once, doing the stuff you need to do, and then getting rid of that paint cleaning your airbrush. It's much less of a chore, which means that you're more likely to do it, or at least in my case. All of you might be horrified to hear this, but think, well, I clear my airbrush out after every single colour or whatever. I tend to go in sessions, so for the way I work, this is much better. I'll skip ahead and again do sub-assemblies and then come back and bring them together. So here we actually start to get the fuselage out. So we change sprue, although we do have a piece from C8 and C2 here, which I'll get before I change. I also feel like I'm going to sneeze. Oh, excuse me. I was right. So C2. It's ironic that in all this hot weather, my hay fever hasn't bothered me at all, and then as soon as it starts raining, it seems to have come back. Jason, I will not add anything to the cockpit that isn't supplied because this is going to be out of the box. So the rationale when I asked on the community posts of the build in terms of what people wanted to see basically boiled down to a comparison between an out-of-the-box kit and then an equivalent kit, either identical or equivalent, which then has all the bits adding to it. So this is going to be out of the box. I will then do the 48 scale Academy Hunter, and that I'm not going to be using any other kit. Cockpit, for instance, that'll be an Aries resin set. I shall be adding, other bits and pieces as we go along, just to compare. What does a modern out-of-the-box kit look like compared to one that you've gone to aftermarket and added all the bells and whistles? I've no idea what these parts are. Some sort of exhaust? Not sure. But we do need to drill a hole in the main fuselage. But we'll get to that in a second. I also want part C8, which is down here. It's quite a chunky attachment. But I'm aware of how much praise I'm going to shower on Airfix during this. I'll point out all the good stuff on the Academy kit when I get to that as well. But just for this, for instance, part C8, which doesn't look to be anything particularly interesting. And again, I'm not sure whether it'll come through on the webcam. Can you see that? I think you can probably just see there's a little arrow molded into this piece to show you which way it goes in the kit. Again, that would have taken some CNC machining on the mold. So somebody will have had to have designed the arrow in CAD and put it into the piece, and then it will have to be machined. Which, granted, probably doesn't add much or anything to the overall cost, relatively speaking. But they still had to think about it and do it. Right? They didn't have to do that. They could have just left that off, and assumed people would put it in the right way. But it's just little things like that that kit manufacturers do that make our lives easier as modelers. I think is worth noting. It's worth commending companies for doing that, whoever they are. I'm not just saying Airfix is the only person that does this, because they are not. I think Tamiya, I usually say Tamiya. I'll say Tamiya occasionally because some people say it that way just to appease them. But Tamiya, for instance, I'll give an example. The Yoo-Hoo, the 219, HE219, is a renowned tail sitter. Right, it's a long, thin fuselage. It's got these long engines, which, of course, in the real thing would be heavy, but of course, in a plastic kit, they're not. So the whole thing is a massive tail sitter. And so they actually mould the cockpit, the cockpit plastic tub, actually has a metal piece that it slots into right in the nose that weights the nose down. Again, it's a small thing. They could have just left it and said, put 40 grams of lead in here or something. But no, they've actually gone out and cast the piece to put in there, all hidden by the plastic and detail, so that you don't have to do that. Really commendable. When companies go to that level of thought and detail, I think they should be applauded. Right, less gabbing and more getting plastic out. So, as we're looking at the fuselage, I'm going to cut both pieces of the fuselage off. Now, here is generally where I will tend to leave a little bit of a nub. I'll show you that in a second. And a couple of reasons I do that. One is it can be quite easy with single-bladed nippers on a tapered fuselage to accidentally, you're right up against it, the blade can actually slide into the fuselage, which then means you have to do filling, which is harder, of course, than trimming. And the other piece is, so if I've cut off 4 of these out of 5, and it's only being supported by 1, it's quite easy for them to just fall and tear off. Not that leaving a little nub helps with that. If you are cutting, further away from the aircraft and it starts to, so if I cut this right up against, and I'm halfway through it and then the thing falls down, then it could tear and rip a chunk out. If I'm doing a little nub, it's going to tear across those weakest points in the little nubbin, and then you're still going to have your tail fin or piece of the fuselage or whatever pristine. So if you see, you won't be able to see this because it's a fraction of a millimeter. So I'm cutting this, because this is curved on both sides, I'm sort of cutting, imagine in massive scale increase. If that's a little nubbin, I'm kind of cutting up like that. So it'll actually end up as a tiny little dome, because the last thing I want to do is cut into the fuselage, because again, they miss you, right? Because I've got a tiny little nubbin. When I glue these together, I'm going to have some sort of seam anyway. Right? So if I've got a seam anyway, and there's a tiny, tiny little piece here that I've got to then sand down, that's much easier than if I've got, a gouge that I've then got to fill and then sand down. More sanding. You want less sanding. I'm sure everybody could do with less sanding in their lives. So yeah, try not to cut down into it, but more sort of away from the surface of the model. And again, just shaving, really. Again, this is a fresh blade, so very sharp. So most of the times I've cut myself with scalpels has been I'm either trying to do something stupid or I'm applying excessive force. It's always user error. The scalpel blade itself doesn't want to hurt me. It's just very easy for it to do so if I do something stupid with it. Okay. So this kit has quite nicely molded ribbing in it as well. So this little piece goes in here. Oh, they're the ejection ports, I think, for the Aiden cannon. For the spent casings. I think that's what they are. If not the spent casings, the exhaust gases, maybe. Don't know. See, that being the case, what I would normally do is drill those out I wouldn't assume that, but I'd look at references, not knowing what they are, and think, are these actually, because they're probably pipes, right? It's unlikely they're going to be solid pieces just sticking out of an airframe. It would be a very odd design choice. Let's have some draggy pipes just there for no reason. Thank you, Ivan, for joining. If you haven't already left, and I'm speaking to nobody, enjoy your teleconference. If anybody does. Ones like this on the top, I don't really care about. So there you go. You can see I've cut that off, and I have left a little bit of a divot. It's actually probably not very easy to see because, again, it's only maybe 0.2 of a millimeter there. But it doesn't matter, right? I mean, I could cut off here, shave that down, because the wing's going on that, so I can do whatever I like. I could write Alex with my scalpel and nobody would see it. I could tag my aircraft. All right, so obviously I am not going to be putting the cockpit in here, but I will be putting piece C2, and right next to it we have this little hole to drill, which I want to do before I put that piece in. And the nice thing here about the instructions is actually directing you which way to, how to do that. So you're not drilling it this way, you're going perpendicular to the aircraft, like that. Like so. I have to do that on the other side as well. Yes, I do. Might as well do that now then. Once again, perpendicular. Yeah, Mark, I know exactly what you mean by the paper cut effect of a scalpel. They are designed to cut flesh. So, they're produced for the medical industry. They're very, very sharp. They blunt fairly quickly, obviously, because they are disposable. But when you cut yourself with these, I've cut myself with these not even noticed until I've noticed blood on the model, and then I realise it's such a hairline cut that it's almost like a paper cut, as you say. And they tend not to go that deep because it is a fine blade, unless you're, again, applying excessive force. But yeah, then when they're healing, you can just, you've got a little flap of skin, that tiny little bit, you just keep knocking it. It is very annoying. I have also stabbed myself quite deeply with a scalpel, and it is unpleasant. Don't do that. In fact, last week I was I'm doing a Kozak 2 Ukrainian MRAP vehicle, and I was doing it at the shop, and I think somebody came in or something, and I was using my scalpel and I dropped it, and of course, what's the first thing it did? It went like that, and then it just nicely stuck into my leg through my jeans. And yeah, that wasn't nice. So this piece, again, little arrow facing forwards, goes back here. That's quite a nice positive fit, actually. Right. So then we have obviously the actual cockpit being put in, and then there's part C22 which goes onto that and then onto here. I think I shall leave that for the time being. I shall leave step 14 for the time being. Let's move on to the intake assemblies. Which are in another room. Get rid of that. Okay, piece A12. This first one here. And A18. On here, I just want to do the other side. Actually, I think I'll take that piece out because these actually go onto this. And it's the same colour, so you might as well have all of that prepped for the same time. So I have several kits of the Hunter, and they all handle the air intakes in a slightly different way. These, well, ahead of their time, really, serpentine intakes, if you think of stealth now, demanding serpentine intakes, so you don't see the very radar reflective turbine blade. Okay. That's interesting. Okay, so they go on the outside. Ah, that's quite nifty. How they've done that. That's quite clever. And these have very positive fit. See, I've not just put those together, and they are quite happy. I'm not going to worry too much about how these look on the outside, because of course these are going to be buried in the wing itself, wing roots at least. Yeah, so Mark, you have a couple of things which are contradictory there. You have the word cheap, and then bits under a millimeter that won't snap when you look at them. Unfortunately, if you've got cheap bits, they're going to be fragile, because producing small diameter bits out of very hard material isn't cheap. Personally, I always use, got a couple of sets of these microbox. Well, you can see how old this is. I've had, spilt glue and all sorts of things, and that's the way it's crazed. Look. So yeah, I've always used these. I've got a couple of boxes of them. I've broken a couple of them, but they're not too bad. Again, it's one of those things. It's if you don't abuse them and try to do silly things with them, generally they're okay. And the pin vise I use is just, I've got a couple of pin vices. There's nothing special about them. I just got like cheap pin vices. They're not branded or anything. I think there were ones like, oh, when you go to model shows, you'll often get like these sellers who sell unbranded tools. And I think my pin vise is just like one of those. It's nothing special at all. But since having the old WoW stick, which I know people have had variable experiences with, because I think their QC is a bit like Airfix's. This is my second one. The first one didn't work at all. I just sent it straight back and got a replacement. This one's been absolutely fine. I've had it for, a year now without any issues. But since having this, I only do under 0.5 millimeter with a pin vise. You know, actual physical one. Hand one, rather. For everything else, this offers low enough RPM and good enough torque to get through your materials without having, you know, the issues of breaking your bits. But of course, the really fine ones you've got to be very, very, very careful with. Now you notice I am not painting the interior of these, because what I will do instead of painting them now is it's a bit of a cheat. I'm just going to be spraying from here gunmetal when they're dry, because unless you look down them with some sort of fiber optic tool, what you're actually going to see is not much. You're going to see the very beginning of them, the gunmetal piece, and you're not really going to see bits that haven't actually managed to get covered by the airbrush. That's actually pretty good. I like that. I like the way they've engineered that. Then it comes to the back with this. Again, I don't think I'm even going to paint that beforehand. If I'm right, I think I can put all of this in place, glue it, without affecting the build. Yes, I believe I can. Yeah, Tamiya tools are okay, I would say. They're nothing particularly special, but they're usually reasonably good. But you pay for that. So, yeah, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, because they got the Tamiya name on, are you prepared to pay more? You will be able to find equally good or better tools elsewhere that don't have their name on. But that's not to say that they're bad tools. You know, they're decent enough. But that's just it. They're decent enough. $3.98. There you go. Yeah, I mean, if they do break, it's not the end of the world when you have to get some more, is it? And usually it's because, again, the times I've broken drill bits, it's because I was applying too much force, and usually in a lateral direction, you know, using too high a speed, you know, trying to use something like this. You can't actually use other drill bits with this because it has a weird shank size, which is one of my main bugbears with it. But it does mean that the drills supplied actually do work with it. and you're not trying to force smaller things. So from that point of view, it's quite a good safeguard. But yeah, the main thing with those tiny drill bits is just patience. You just got to be really patient doing the hole, which is not my forte, naturally. I'm naturally quite an impatient person. And it's one of the things that I like modelling for, is because it does slow you down. Arguably not enough in my case, but you know, for me, it helps me just take things a little bit slower rather than trying to force everything. Ooh, I've left a big chunky bit here, which actually wasn't that bad coming off. So this little aerial here reminds me, you can hardly even see it, look. I've often trimmed pieces like that off thinking that they were, you know, black. And then you get to the stage, it's just like, oh, this has to be yellow. And it's like, oh, I just trimmed that off. Yeah, always check the instructions. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, you can't really see down there, so I'm not particularly worried that I haven't, you know, given it a wonderful paint job. Because if you start coming near my models with a fibre optic inspection tool, I'm going to ask you to leave. Okay, so other side of the fuselage, very similar thing. We've got the hole we drilled. Oh, we've got some little bottles. No idea what those are. Part C6. So this is one aspect of modelling, and I don't know what you guys think, but I always like when I get a model like this, like the Hunter. Okay, it's a nice aircraft, but it's not one that I have a particular interest in. And on the channel, one of the things I like about doing the YouTube channel is that quite often, you know, I'll ask, you know, what should I do, you know, for X, Y, and Z, and it'll be a choice that I wouldn't have normally done. And I quite like that because I think it gives you a bit of a different perspective. And then, given that, you know, that this is an aircraft that I wouldn't normally have chosen, particularly. Again, I have no idea what these bottles are, but doing the research, actually finding out about the aircraft, and, you know, like I say, what are these little things that stick out? You know, should those be pipes? Do I need to drill those out? I actually really enjoy that aspect of the hobby, the kind of historical, the military history part of it, and learning about things. I mentioned this on one of our streams about Johnny Johnson's Spitfire. So it wasn't going to be the scheme that I would naturally have been drawn to, you know, another British Spitfire. It's like, yeah, that French one and the American one looked like really interesting paint schemes. But when it came through on the community poll, you know, that was the scheme that people wanted to see. I'd never heard of Johnny Johnson before then. And so to learn that, oh, actually, he was the highest scoring British ace. And it's like, how could I have missed not knowing about him? You know, I've been interested in World War II military history for, you know, since I was a kid, and yet I've never heard of Johnny Johnson. I must have really missed that. You know, so I did a lot of research about his aircraft and his career and stuff, and he wrote quite a lot of memoirs. So I bought some of his memoirs and was reading those, and it's just such a fascinating account of, you know, his life from his perspective, and, you know, his time when he was flying JEJ, and just some of the stories. and how brutal life was then. He recounted one story about how one of his, I think it was a fairly new pilot to the squadron, when he was wing commander, came in, he was flying with him, and they were on their way back, and he had been hit, this other guy, and he got a fire started in his cockpit or somewhere in the front of the aircraft, and they were like saying, bail out, one of us will circle around and stay until the aircraft gets here. But his cockpit catch he couldn't get it open, and so they just had to watch as he made a couple of remarks, and then his radio went dead, and Mark John Johnson was like, that was the last we ever heard from him. And it's like, utterly brutal. The guy, basically then crashed into the sea in a burning plane and either drowned or burnt to death. And it's like, and that was, he had to watch that happen, and then just get back on with it. Get back, refuel, go on the next sortie. And it's such a different perspective on life, But I really enjoy that aspect of the hobby, the learning about the aircraft, the people that flew them, that designed them, that worked on them. And I think each new subject, just learning about these things. You should always be learning. I always enjoyed learning about different things. So again, those bottles, I guess. So you're just going to be able to see them, just about. Don't even know if you can see that, even with the lighting I've got here. So they're just on this lip internally. Again, that's really nice that Airfix have gone to that to put those in. Wonder what they are. If anybody knows, put it in the chat. Okay, so the majority of that's 56. That's 85 for black. Okay, let's do the other air intake. I think I was less careful cutting this one off the sprue, and I seem to have made a better job of it. It's ironic. Evening, Phil. So yeah, very positive bit on these. I also don't mind being quite liberal with extra thin on these kinds of joins. I mean, it does affect the plastic because you can see where you've put it even when it's evaporated. Because obviously it does dissolve the styrene, and then it refixes in its new configuration, which optically makes it different. But once you cover it with a coat of paint, you don't see it at all, because it is literally a surface phenomenon. It doesn't go deep into the plastic or anything. So yeah, you can see that sort of discoloration, you get that shininess. That's dry. It's not wet. But I would rather put a little bit too much on and have that effect, and it, have the chance to be drawn by capillarity into that junction, give a good bond, than not put enough in for the sake of cosmetic appearance, which won't matter. Apart from the fact it's not on a visible piece anyway. But for example, this is the ferret I'm working on at the moment. And I did that with all of these joints on the turret here, and you can't tell at all now. There's no visible trace of that at all. So, yeah. What is that? Anyway, proof of concept, as they say. Now, I need that little bit, don't I? Part C3 on this side. Oh, hello, shaking himself. What are you doing? We have C3. Do we have anything else to do on this side? No, it takes... Oh, we do have to put 20 grams of weight behind the cockpit. When building the C scheme, fill in gun ports on both sides of the fuselage. Well, I don't think we want to build a non-gunned aircraft, but we'll have a look anyway. See what this. I always find putting parts in like this more fiddly than it needs to be. They're not the sort of thing that tweezers really work very well with, as I shall demonstrate now. I always find there's more chance of this pinging off with tweezers than there is with fingers. There we go. The other tool that I have that I sometimes use for this sort of thing is a jeweler's gem holder. Which I'll grab if I can see it, show you guys. There we go. The other slight bugbear I have with these sorts of gun ports, right, is they always just do them as these sort of scoops. They never seem to drill them through. Because obviously they had a gun, they were just cutaways in the fuselage so the bullets didn't, rip great holes. But, effectively, the flight path of the bullet is this, right? So at the back here, there's a hole where the prow of the cannon is. And they've never, ever seem to actually do that. I've seen it in a couple of kits. Most of the time, it's just these sort of gouges. I really don't enjoy that. I won't do anything about it on this kit. I will change it on the Academy one. And then you can see visually the kind of difference it makes. Because if you look at real aircraft, it doesn't look like that. I mean, it might do if you're looking at it sort of at an angle. But if you're looking at it face on, you can most definitely see it. It always mystifies me why companies don't try and represent that. Oh, yes. So these live builds, I'll show everything. I'm not going to be doing anything off camera for these. So everything that I do on the model will be shown on camera. So there's, I'm not making a regular video of this. This is just going to be live build. So you will see everything that happens, all my mistakes, all of the unpleasant things that I do. You will see it all. I'm trying to work out whether I can glue this into the fuselage, onto the fuselage now, or if I have to wait till actually bringing together, because I don't want to get into a point where it's really hard to do something. Unfortunately, it's not playing ball because I need 3 hands. So if that was glued, could I then bring this in? Survey says maybe. Oh, survey says yes. Of course, it's falling out now, but okay. That's a good thing. I can also use this side as a bit of a reference. Okay, so given that I can do that, yeah, I can see. So if you can see the way that this is made, because this is effectively this piece rests on this ring here. There's no, when you think the fuselage half is coming in here, and the way that this is with this cutout, you're just doing that. So there's nothing to sort of catch on it, which makes sense. So if it's glued in place in this half, and you bring the two halves together, it's just going to fit on, which is a good thing. We like that. So let me tammy it extra thin, or man's model moments, thin cement this. Try to evaporate most of the solvent. And then what I'll actually do is I'll bring the two together. Make sure it goes in the right place. Oh, which it does automatically. Oh, no fiddling about needed. That's you see, that again is the level of engineering you've got to. That is what CAD modeling has brought to the hobby. So back in 1991 or 1990 or whatever it was when the Academy kit, in fact, let me have a look. When was? Let me open ScaleMates. Bear with. Hawker Hunter FGA 9 was 1997. Okay. So in 1997, Academy made a very nice Hunter. Very similar, I think, in a lot of ways to Airfix's. But obviously they did it without, if you think of computers in 1997, what Windows version were on there? Windows 98? No, because that was Windows 98, so it was the one before that, whatever that was. Windows for work groups? It can't have been that, can it? I don't know. A pretty crappy version of Windows anyway. CAD wasn't really very advanced back then, so they did it the old-fashioned way. Doing it with CAD, this is the precision that it brings. I mean, that is very impressive to have that complex a sweep of part. As I say, people have approached it in various different ways. Revell did it with their 1/32 scale one. Academy did it with their 48 scale. But to be able to do that, you know, having all of those pieces fit absolutely flawlessly, there's no gaps or anything, there's nothing pushing, you know, I'm not having to force it together or anything, is really, that's what computing has brought. You know, I mentioned technology, the mold making technology hasn't altered a great deal. The design technology has altered enormously. So I'm glad that I'm convinced that that's going to be in the correct place. So I don't need to, I was going to clamp it together, but I don't think that's needed. I'll put that to the side. Let's have a little look at schemes. Right, so. Well, I can tell you straight away which scheme I'm going to do. It's not going to be C, although I rather like the naval ones, but I think that's better on a different aircraft. I've got a Seafire, which I want to do soon. I keep meaning to get it out of the box. It only came last week or week before, and I really want to do it. But a gutter slow aircraft would be fine, but it's exactly the same scheme. This is the aircraft flying by Alan Pollock under Tower Bridge, so it has to be this one, really, doesn't it? I can't not do this aircraft. So that'll be the one, XF442. Also, just looking up, I don't know if Steve from Steve's Stuff is in tonight. Don't know, can't see on this, but if you are Steve, your coin is winging its way to you. Apologies for the delay. Just with the shop and everything, it's been sitting in different places, waiting for postage. And finally today, I've managed to get the Royal Mail. They'll be picking it up tomorrow. It will go first class recorded. You shall have it first thing on Monday. So we don't need to worry about filling any of those cannon ports. Do need to put 20 grams in there. I'm not putting a stand on it, so see, if I was actually going to do this not properly, but for myself with this aircraft, I probably would do it flying, but because of the side-by-side, I'll be doing it on the ground. There's a diorama in that, isn't there? After he's landed with his him being escorted away by a rather irate squadron leader. So we've got these bits, and then we get into. There's a couple of bits I want to do before. Oh, no, can I do that? Interesting. I'm just mulling because typically, as I said before, I do all of these sub-assemblies. I also like to have, things like the undercarriage base done, so that again, when I get the airbrush out, I can do all of these pieces all in one fell swoop. Yeah, I might need to change the paint I'm using a bit, but otherwise, I don't have to go back and do construction. The way that this is laid out, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that. Okay. Well, we can certainly do this piece. Look, you want to go out? You want to go out? Nope. That was the sound of an idiot dog messing a whole bunch of stuff up off camera. I don't know. Gotta love him, but even that's me sometimes. So parts A7. This I think is frame F. I think this is the one with the corrected pieces. Yes, the corrected exhaust, but only for option C. So I don't think we need much of that fret at all, actually. Fret, frame, sprue, whatever it is that you wish to call that. So we need parts A7, A8, and A9, which are rather obvious and located together here. And for scheme A, it's A3 and A4. Yes, you've got a little pen nib. A dog making a nuisance of himself. So here, you see, that is going to require more force than I'm comfortable with putting towards myself. That's when you put it somewhere where you can actually cut it separately. There we go. Achieved without blood loss. With blood. No, without blood loss. That's great. It's a little... there's going to be quite a little bit of filling there. Not so much on the top there. That looks pretty good, but underneath, I don't know if you can see that well, but here it doesn't quite meet at the back and along there. It's going to need a little bit, not much, just a little touch. And then these. That way, the other way. I quite like this system, which leaves the inside nice and smooth. I mean, you still get a center, but but again, I'm not too worried about the painting of that beforehand, because we're going to just blast it with the airbrush. So I'm going to have to just tell my dog home. Pablo! Pablo, come on! In you come! Pablo! He is willfully ignoring me. X-Acto are still about. They are still making decent knives and razor saws and the like. I think it's just a case of competition. There's a lot of players in the market now producing decent stuff, and I think a lot of Chinese companies that are producing decent stuff at a much lower price point. It's the old story. Did it a million times in a million different industries. So again, I think actually with what you can see down there, down the black hole, I'm not too worried about the painting of this in any meaningful way. I think the blast of the airbrush is going to be sufficient. There'll be those who call me a heretic for it, but there we go. Then this comes in which way? A little tab goes at the top. Is that right? The other top, Alex. Oh, come on, in you come. Come on. Come on. In you come. On your bed. Settle down. There you go. Oh, excuse me. Right. Yeah. That's not right. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. I'm not a big fan of that. There's sort of a gap at the top. You can see that. There, you see that? I mean, okay, you're not going to be able to see up there, I guess, but it's just not what I expected, I guess. Maybe I could put it. Anywho, you just get that all glued up. Just a little application of PET. You can hear that chugging sound in the background. That's my little heater. Unfortunately, having to have the door open for Doggo has meant the temperature's gone below its minimum auto threshold. That's, you know, that's quite a nice assembly, but I'm not that impressed with that underside piece, I must say. But we are building this out of the box. So yeah, I think I would, well, one, check, but I can't see that that's actually how it would look. Although, you know, some 60s aircraft design was pretty bloody ropey, so you never know. Okay, where are we at? 2132. I think we've now pretty much reached a natural break point here with that, because the next steps really require, you see, if I skip forward to this and look at these, this is obviously if it's in flight. The engine bay pieces here go actually on the top wing. See, the top wing has the engine bays molded in, and then these pieces go in on that into the side of the fuselage. So I can't really do that without putting the fuselage together. I can't put the fuselage together until I've painted the stuff. So I think rather than try and rush those pieces, I will leave that on break there. It's been 2 hours, so it's a good stint. And where we are is here. So not bad progress, considering that I spent 15 minutes sorting out the damn camera and then another 15 minutes getting everything sorted. So really it's only been an hour and a half. So let's just have a quick look. A, B, and C. So A and B require these 3 holes. C requires those 2. So we could do that little bit of drilling. Just a prep. A little bit of flash, look. It is literally connected by a thread, though, so I don't think I really can fault them for that piece. So again, when I'm cutting out a big piece from sprue like this, I always try and go for the least load bearing points first. So again, just to avoid that possibility of them tearing anything out if they if the load on them is too much. Just looking at that actually. I think it's a weird way to have molded it there. So I think there was a little lug on that where the thing comes in. So what I've done here is actually cut it flush. I don't think I should have done that. Well, I don't think it's disastrous, but But I'll show you how I repair that kind of error, because it's still on the sprue. I shall take some Tammy extra thin. Again, because it's a flush cut with the single bladed cutters, I can glue it back on. Obviously there's no gap because they've basically sliced through the plastic, don't deform it at all. And as we cement that piece on, it will actually go. Doesn't want to stick. I'm going to cut it where I should have cut it. That little piece is now obviously on the fuselage. Not fuselage, the wing. There's a little bit of enticing to where it should be. And it'll need trimming down because obviously I've cut it a bit larger now. But far easier to do that than, you know, cutting that piece off and then trying to attach it. These pieces here, very broad injection gates across there going to this fairly thin piece. And I'm going to cut these way up. So I've got no control trying to get them any closer than that. And then the main load bearing piece, which is here, again, that makes it very easy then to take off. But these pieces, I'm never a fan of where it connects like this. It might be unavoidable from an engineering standpoint, but you've got this thin piece and then you've got the broad connection piece. You know, it's asking for trouble really, so I think it has to be really careful, those kind of joints. In fact, now I've got it off, you see, I can trim it a bit closer because I've got a lot more control about where I can put the nippers, the exact angle. I've got it very close, and then I can use my scalpel blade to just shave off a tiny bit there. And then I'll just, you know, any sanding, I'll still need to do a bit of sanding just to trim that slight edge. See the slight burr there, but I'll deal with that when I'm dealing with the overall finishing of the airframe. Same with this side. Because again, what I want to avoid is gouging into the plastic, tearing pieces out. Slightly rough cast actually, the edges of these. Can't really tell now, I've gone along and trimmed it a bit, but yeah, so you can see here the little tab here. See, that's what I glued back on. Slightly too large, slightly skewed. But I can trim that down with my scalpel as I need to next time. It'll probably turn out that it's flush anyway. But hey, there is some nice detail in these bays, but again, the way they've done it with the ribbing and things, you have to put these together. And this comes over the top. Again, this is a clever way of doing it because it's a very complex shape. This, you know, it's hard to get right. The real thing when Academy brought out theirs about how to do it. I'm not going to trim that just at this moment, but it's just to show you this. See, if I were to put those bay doors in now, can't really do it without this being all glued in properly. So yeah. Hence, coming to the end for tonight. So that's that piece. And then, as we're not going to get the wings mixed up, because obviously they are handed, go ahead and take these off, drill those holes, and then I think we'll be done. So, let's see. I need these 3 holes. 1mm and 1.2. We'll do them all 1 to start with and see where we go on. I can come back and enlarge holes. I can't fill them in. Well, you can fill them in afterwards, but it's a pain, as I'm sure you all know. There we go. A little bit to make us there. A quick test fit just to see how that looks. Okay. Not the most intuitive alignment. Ah, now, there we go. Look, can you see how... Maybe it needs a dark colour on the back, maybe? Can you see how that is? We've got these little burrs on the top. So this is cast. That's casting. That's not... I've not done anything on there. It is weird. I think I've ever seen that on a model before. A little thread. Again, I'm not convinced about the Indian manufacturing group. The VJ Tools. The fit of the wings is good, but you have to go from these front 2 lugs. Otherwise, as you saw at the beginning there, I was struggling with actually getting it located properly. But once you've got those first 2 lugs, it just fits in nicely. And it definitely has that elegant kind of swept contour. It's very recognisably Hunter. But anyway, I think we will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me on the first of these live builds. I think the second one is going to be on Sunday night. I think I'm going to do a Friday night and a Sunday night, at least for the first, for this week and a bit. So Maria is away, so it makes it very easy for that. And then we'll see how we get on. But that is where we got to. next time we'll start with the painting, with the internal pieces, and putting this together. I think it'll crack on quite quickly, actually. I mean, the fit is really good. There isn't going to be much cleaning up on these seams, really, I don't think. So that all looks pretty good. So we'll do I might spray the bays and the bay walls on the sprue before assembly. These, of course, I'm going to spray individually and then bring it all together. But that's what we'll do, I say, using the royal we, on Sunday. So again, thank you guys really tremendously for joining me tonight. As I say, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything you want to see, anything you want me specifically to comment on or focus on or explain what I'm doing, please let me know in the comments.
That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.